Where to start? It's Dire Docks from the level Dire Docks, and also Jolly Roger Bay. And you're gonna need that calming music to get over that freaky eel. Starting with SNES, you started to hear a lot more samples in the music, and it was starting to step away from chiptune sounds. They still had technical limitations, so a lot of the time instruments were just created using one-shots of audio that were just played on different pitches of a keyboard. A lot of those samples from games have been converted into a file format called sound font. They are online to find. So I'll be using Direct Wave to open up the sound font files. Then you can drag that into Direct Wave like that, and it'll give you this option to choose which instruments you want selected, but you can select them all. It just gave me a warning about monolithic mode. If you don't turn that on in the options over here, then when you try to save it and reopen the project file, it will just have lost the instrument that you had selected. So it's worth having that turned on. Why it's not on by default, I don't know. And then you have all these different instruments from the game. But as you can see, this is just like one sample that I can then play on the keyboard. After hearing the electric piano, I realized that was the sample used for Dire Docks. But someone said on my last video about Lavender Town, they made a good point. When making the soundtrack, they didn't have any sound fonts to use, so the samples must have come from somewhere. Either they synthesized that themselves or they recorded it. I tried to scour the internet on synths that were popular around the time of the 90s. I came across this post where a lot of people were trying to guess where the source of the sound came from. Any earliest Roland's E piano patch. Closest you can get to is the DX7, basically full tines. And if we click that link, wow, that sounds pretty spot on. That's very reminiscent of this. And I know that Citrus, along with some other plugins as well, like FM8 and also Dext, which is a free plugin, they can import the actual patches from the DX7. If you go to this little menu thing up here in Citrus, Yamaha DX presets, you can go to this thing called import sysx. Sex. This is one site called DX sysx that has a bunch of presets. Even Brian Eno. If I go to E, I can download these E piano stuff, and there's other sources you can find. If you want to use some retro FM sounds, then these are like a really good source for doing that. E piano. In a like one sysx file, there's lots of different presets you can have. See, it's close, but it was never like exactly the right sound that I wanted from this. I'm sure it's possible if you tweak long enough with FM settings, but I was already happy with the fact that we found the source of where it came from. In Direct Wave, you also have some built-in effects. You have like a chorus and a reverb send. I think I'm only using the reverb to give it like a little extra space. Later on in the track, we get strings, which I'm also going to assume from a synth like the DX7. I also increased the attack of it so it feels like they fade in a little bit more. Also having the release be a little bit long as well and not really short, or else it just cuts out, which is going to sound weird when you're playing like a melody. That's very unnatural sounding and robotic, so having that release be a bit longer. Yeah, those notes flow over each other a lot nicer that way. And then later on we get the drums and a lower sub. So this is the whole introduction part where it's just electric piano. This really is the main piece of the track. This is all together, it forms one chord. And then the next part also forms a different chord. As you can see, it starts on a different note. And then it goes back to that first chord. Now throughout the whole song, no matter what chords the song is in, it always starts off with the root note of the chord, and then the fifth, and then the octave high version of the root note. And it does that over for the second chord. That's almost like a bass line in a way. Sometimes it leads back. Even when the chord progression changes. And then the rest of the notes just kind of play along the scale that the chord is in. Let me open up the piano version. That's Alt-V, by the way, to like quickly turn on. If you have other chords in the background, then you can see them going on. And it's nice that you can actually turn them on and off, because in FL Studio, when you see them, and you're using like the Alt right click to play like melodies and chords, then it'll also play the ghost chords. Even if the thing's turned off, which I wish it wouldn't do that. But if you press Alt-V to make them disappear, then it won't play them because it can't see them, I guess. I would say that this track is in G major. You know, it feels like you could end the song there, and that's usually a really good indication that is the tonic chord, the I, the big I. If you're in the scale of C major, you're gonna end the song on a C major chord, and it's gonna sound really final. In the scale of G major, you have an F sharp, but if we go to the next chord here, there's no F sharp, it's just F. So, okay, well, maybe, And then when you go to later on in the track as well, you get this chord that has an E flat, a B flat. Those aren't also part of G major either. Okay, so these chords are a simplified version. It has these extensions. We're just gonna ignore them for now and just look at the basic part of the chords, the triad part. And it's always a major chord. It's just the major chord shifting down and then shifting down again and then shifting up for the last chord. And I remember this from another track from Koji Kondo. I don't know if you've heard of this little known track from this game called The Legend of Zelda, but the chords in that game also do something really similar, where they just take a major chord, they shift it down the scale. It does the exact thing. Now you can put chord theory behind this and be like, oh, well, you know, it's using modal interchange, using borrowed chords, flat, seventh. You can give all sorts of names to this, but if you want to think of it in a creative sense, you kind of can just take the same chord and shift it up and down as you please. I know this is a very common trick in house music. Just shift this up and down. And that's kind of what's happening over here with the ARP, that the ARP is just shifting down, but not all of it. That's the interesting part, is that not all of it shifts. So you might expect the following ARP to kind of also just shift down in its entirety. And you could have done something like that, but that's not what's happening. Really, it's just the root notes that get shifted and the rest stay in place. It does occasionally like change one or two notes. This B goes down to the A sharp, and I think that's just to fit better with the fifth here, because otherwise then you get an ARP that has not only an A sharp, and a B. So all those together, it doesn't sound so great, even when it's split apart. So that becomes A sharp instead. Feels a little bit better that way. So that's just the opening section of the chord progression. So in this next section, I'm calling the B section then. These are the same chords that we just heard, but now they're twice as fast. A little bit different voicing, but doesn't matter. At the core, that major chord just shifting down, and the melody also continues that like kind of going up and down the scale. You'll notice that dun, 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 dun. This is just these notes again. So there is like lots of little repetitions. Also, what's interesting is that after 4 bars, it's pretty typical to sort of repeat that progression again, and it does go back to the G, but it lingers there for like an extra 2 bars, and then it begins the progression again. So it's almost like each round of chords is really 6 bars instead of the usual standard 4. And it just stays on that G, and now we go again. And then we get to a new section. This is where the chord progression actually changes for the first time in the track. Instead of doing what happened before, where it's just that same major chord getting shifted down, we actually do get some minor chords as well thrown into this progression. So this is just C major, B minor, A minor, and G major again. Then that repeats. And now here is a 2-5-1 progression. For those that don't know, going from like a 2 chord to a 5 chord to the 1 is a very common, almost cliche way of getting back to the 1 chord in a lot of jazz music, but any sort of music can use that. Now some extra instruments come in, the strings. I've just made them really simple. They're just the triads of each chord being played here. And then we get to a new section. I'm calling this section D. Still is using very similar chords that we've used already, except it's playing the F and the A on top of each other. Basically, it's just taking the root note and the third of the chord. So that's the A. I thought this also sounded a bit like a 2-5-1 again. I think it's just a 5th though, twice in a row. It's just staying on the D note, the 5th of this G. And then we're back right to the intro, but now the strings carry over and they sort of played a lead. What you're gonna hear on from this point out is exactly the same. It just repeats over, but now there's some extra sounds that come in. And that's again doing that do-do-do, do-do-do. It's doing other stuff as well, like it repeats the high octave root note each time and does a lot of this do-do-do. So it feels a little bit more active and there's a bit more stuff going on there than just that opening 3 notes drum pattern, which is... A lot of the kicks have a quick 16th kick before each beat. The snare is just playing on every 2nd and 4th. There's nothing too crazy there. I couldn't decide whether to use like a hi-hat or a shaker, so I did both of them. The important part with this shaker pattern is that the velocities change. Because if it was just the same velocity, that would feel very repetitive. Adding that velocity there really does like a good job. And then later on, it gets a sort of ride cymbal. The project file is available to download, so if you want to take a look at this, the sound fonts, I hope the sound fonts can get zipped up, but we'll see. If not, I'll just include a link. Thank you everybody on Patreon for supporting me and allowing me to make more videos. I do lessons. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I'll see you next time.